I think at an earlier meeting, for some of you, I mentioned to you the fact that even though we sell gasoline and diesel fuel, that we have no emotional attachment to either one of those. And our view is what we're selling our customers is the right to continue driving their car. So if something better and cleaner comes along, we'll certainly be happy to adopt that. I also should make it clear that my comments today and the opinions that I express are those of Gate Petroleum, and some of our competitors and some of you may disagree, and we can have a lively discussion about that afterwards if that is the case. Just to give you an overview of where we are locally, statewide, nationally as it relates to biofuels. E10, which for those who don't know is 10% ethanol, 90% gasoline, has been mandated by the state of Florida since the end of last year. We've had E10 in all of our locations since the middle of 2009. We offer E85, 85% ethanol, at 3 of our locations in Jacksonville. And we've had very minimal volume to this point, but we may add a few more locations. E15 has been recently permitted by the EPA, but it's not yet legal in Florida. And even if it were, frankly, there are too many legal and logistical problems right now. Car warranties don't cover ethanol blends beyond 10%. The dispensers are not certified for blends beyond 10%. And because the EPA has only allowed this E15 for 2007 later automobiles and trucks, you've got a real potential for misfueling and the liability that would come from that. For all of these reasons, several trade associations have filed suit to prevent the EPA from implementing E15. Even if all of that's overcome, though, there's still a logistical problem that we have and the majority of our competitors are likely to have. At a gate station, a Hess station, whichever one it might be, typically you're going to have 1 tank underground for regular gasoline, 1 tank for premium gasoline, 1 tank for diesel fuel. The people that buy mid-grade is blended at the pump. So there's really no way to offer both E10 for the older vehicles and E15 for the newer vehicles without putting another tank in the ground. And that's an expensive proposition. That's not to say it won't be done once we get over all this, but we would really prefer that when the transition to E15 occur for all vehicles, and that it also then be certified by the automobile manufacturers. The American Association of Automobile Manufacturers is one of the entities that's joined the suit against the EPA, so I don't think you're likely to see automobile warranties going to E15 anytime soon. Another way that you could offer E15 would be to use a blender pump and convert one of your tanks to ethanol. This is an expensive proposition also. Blender pumps cost about $50,000 and the installation can run to about $125,000. So few marketers are going to incur that cost, again, with all the potential legal liability on the horizon. Diesel fuel has its own issues. The current specifications for ultra-low sulfur diesel allow a 5% biodiesel content. You can have 5% biodiesel in that, and it still qualifies as ultra-low sulfur diesel. Where that's available, we do utilize that, but it's not available yet in Jacksonville, and the reason for that is the poor blending economics for the major oil companies. The cost of biodiesel is too high. We've had a number of requests from customers to offer B20, 20% biodiesel, 80% ultra-low sulfur diesel. That has been an issue also because of not only of unreliable supply, but quality concerns and the uncertain economics of that. And again, even if we resolve all of those, we're back to the issue of we have one diesel tank sitting at that location. So if we offer B20 to some people, we have to offer B20 to everybody. We're willing to do that once we have ascertained, once we're able to secure quality supply and a reasonable supply and at a reasonable price, of course, also. Natural gas is something we're taking a look at. We have no plans right now to install natural gas refueling unit at our stores, but we're willing to consider that in the future. You may be interested, just recently, an organization called the U.S. Energy Security Council, which is composed of a number of people that have served in the government and a number of people representing the oil companies. They contend that natural gas converted to methanol for flex fuel vehicles is really the best way to reduce our dependence on oil. And they have an interesting viewpoint. This makes a lot of sense because one of the obstacles that natural gas vehicles, say, have is that our whole petroleum infrastructure for production, transportation, and marketing relates to liquid transportation fuels. So anything that fits within that structure is going to be much more easily accommodated. So we have huge reserves of natural gas in this country. And it might make a lot more sense since Congress has already urged the automobile manufacturers to make flex fuel vehicles that can run on gasoline, ethanol, and any variation of the contents of those. Methanol to fit into that mix as well. Apparently there's just a few more additional modifications that have very limited costs that have to be made to a flex fuel vehicle. Methanol is a little more corrosive than ethanol, so there's some fittings and pipes, apparently some hoses that have to maybe be a little more sturdy to resist methanol, but that would make a lot of sense to me, and it would fit again within our existing infrastructure system. This group has just gotten together, and what sort of progress they're going to make, I don't know. In the state, there's been a number of changes in the last year or so. The Energy and Climate Commission has been dissolved. All energy matters now in the state of Florida under the jurisdiction of the Department of Agriculture. There's still a few grants outstanding to encourage biofuel production and distribution. But given the current budgetary situation of the state, it's very unlikely that this is going to be expanded or extended. You may be interested to know there's going to be an energy summit that the state puts on in Orlando, October 26 to 28. And I think you should learn a lot more at this summit about what, if any plans that the state has for biofuels. You can find it on the Department of Agriculture website, the information about that. The agenda is not finalized totally, but it's pretty well firmed out, and it looks like it'll be an interesting and informative program. On the federal level, the ethanol and biodiesel blending credits are scheduled to expire at the end of this year. All indications are that Congress is just going to take the easy way out and let those expire and do nothing about them. The credit for E85 dispensers and blender pumps will likely die also. If all of that happens, then it brings an interesting situation into play. Currently, ethanol is more expensive than gasoline. So absent the 45-cent blending credit, E10 will cost more than conventional gasoline. You would think then that would cause people, where there's not a state mandate at least, to go back to selling clear conventional gasoline. That's not going to happen as long as the renewable fuel standard is still in place. The renewable fuel standard was first passed in 2005 and expanded in 2007. And this year it requires refiners and importers to have a minimum renewable fuel content of about 8%. And that's across all the fuels. And since there's very minimal renewable fuel content on the diesel fuel side right now, that effectively means that you have to have over about 10.2% in the gasoline that's sold this year, which they can't comply with. So they're having to buy so-called RINs, renewable credits for that. So the renewable fuel standard is in all likelihood will continue to be in place. And may even have a higher requirement for next year. So for that reason, right now, it's very difficult to buy clear conventional gasoline without ethanol. And I think that will continue to be the case. So with or without the tax credit, I think E10 is here to stay, at least until it's supplemented by E15 if that's happened. On the same time, the ethanol import tariff, 51 cents a gallon that's effectively prevented any ethanol or very little ethanol from being imported into the United States, that's scheduled to expire. And in all likelihood, that will happen as well. If that does happen, Florida would be the primary potential beneficiary of all the cheap Brazilian ethanol, except for the fact that for the last 2 years they've had very poor sugarcane crops and they're not exporting any ethanol right now. They don't have enough. As a result of the decline in the Brazilian ethanol production, you may be interested to know that the United States this year will become the world's largest producer of ethanol. Finally, there was a congressional hearing yesterday, and I need to read this name, on H.R. 1380. It's the New Alternative Transportation to Give Americans Solution Act of 2011. It is noteworthy because it extends and it expands in some cases all the tax credits related to natural gas vehicles and lets virtually all other energy credits expire. What the chances of passage are of that is anybody's guess. I think something will be done as it relates to natural gas vehicles and some of these other credits, but I think it'll be very minimal at most. I'll be happy to field your questions. Yes, sir.
I see out on Hexter Drive by all the fuel containers, Gate does have a future biofuel site allocated at that site.
We did. We were looking into constructing a facility out there, possibly even putting a biodiesel plant on there. We had a feasibility study about that. We ended up building a terminal requires an inordinate amount of permits that you have to get from various organizations. And in the course of pursuing that, we ended up concluding an agreement at the BP terminal where we sublease and are the sole occupier part of that. So what we have out there right now is the headquarters of all of our truck fleet and our dispatch operations. Yes, Jay?
Just curious, I mean, the state of Florida, especially in Northeast Florida, and not only Gate, but like, when you were talking about the potential for E15, depending on what comes out of that, but E85, do you see more requests? There's going to be an expansion for E85?
It's going to take a while. We average about 2,000 gallons a month at each one of those dispensers. We saw some surveys that right now, I think in Duval County, there's about 18,000 flex fuel vehicles. A number of people have a flex fuel vehicle and don't even know they have one. The newer ones are more clearly marked. I think it would be a wonderful idea if Congress did require the automakers to convert and produce 100% flex fuels. They know how to do it. Ford and General Motors have been doing it in Brazil for years. It's a question of switching from their current models to the new ones, and until they exhaust that platform in their terms, and I don't quite understand all the logistics, they're reluctant to do that. And even if we converted overnight and every new car and truck was flex fuel, it would take about 15 years to completely convert, the existing fleet in the United States. But clearly it makes sense to try to do so. It adds about $100 to the cost of a vehicle to make it flex fuel. So it's, it's an insignificant cost. And I think last year, General Motors and Ford pledged that by next year, at least 50% of their vehicles would be flex fuel. That may be accelerated, I don't know.
Just as a follow-up, what's the capacity of the tanks that y'all have, or on the E85, or you say 2,000 gallons a month? Is that like out of a 10,000 gallon tank?
It varies. The state of Florida required a few years ago that all tanks be converted to double wall tanks, and in the process of doing that, we stuck some tanks in those locations to handle E85, and it was a question of how much space we had in the tank area there. So we have some 5,000 gallon tanks and 10,000 gallon tanks, but whatever the size of the tank, if it's depleted, then we'll fill it up more often.
Yeah, I was just thinking about turnover, what ethanol does over time.
Yeah. we have our own inventory of ethanol here in Jacksonville. So we're able to blend the 85 as much as we need, or whatever thing. And we have the capacity to sell straight ethanol to someone else that might want to blend it. We can just sell it and deliver it to them as well. So we are, it's being brought in by rail from the Midwest for the most part, although the facility that we're leasing does have the capability of receiving ethanol by water. So if and when we can get access to Brazilian or any other sort of imported ethanol, if we can do that at a better cost, we will. Yeah, Tom?
What's your opinion about the economics of ethanol, the corn-based
You mean
ethanol?
the production of that?
Yeah.
Well, as you may know, we spent a fair amount of time and a fair amount of money a few years ago exploring building a corn-based ethanol plant here in Florida. The economics just really don't make any sense. It cost a bushel of corn. It cost about 75 cents to get a bushel of corn down here from the Midwest. You can bring liquid ethanol for about 13 cents a gallon. Several other people have tried to build a corn-based ethanol plant. There's one in Georgia that recently filed for bankruptcy. There's several others that have been trying to get funding. I don't think there's any future for that at all, and particularly with the momentum in Congress and elsewhere to really kind of restrict the expansion of corn-based ethanol because of the food for fuel conflict that is, and move people over more to cellulosic ethanol. So we are very hopeful and very interested that someone can find a Florida feedstock that can be economically converted to ethanol, and we have an interest in building a plant ourselves. You can turn almost anything into ethanol. The question is, can you turn it into ethanol at a cost that makes sense? And that's the stumbling block that you have with switchgrass and some of the other things that are being experimented with right now. But somebody's going to come up with something that works. We have a huge amount of potential resources here in the state of Florida, and it would make sense to do so. And of course, the state's very much interested in doing that for a number of reasons. The state of Florida is the third largest gasoline market of the United States behind California and Texas, but we have the least secure supply of gasoline and diesel fuel because every ounce that comes to this state comes by water. We don't have a pipeline network that delivers it to us, and we have no refineries in the state. So any of you that lived here any period of time know that in hurricane season, we can have shortages whether or not we actually have a hurricane hit in the state. If something's brewing out of the Gulf of Mexico or in the Atlantic, it disrupts tanker travel to here. And at the same time, stations or TV stations are telling folks, look at your hurricane checklist, and somewhere on there it says fill up your car with gasoline. So at the same time the supply is being disrupted, people that usually drive around with a half a tank of gasoline are driving around with a full tank of gasoline. And the state's declared a number of state of emergencies related to things like this in the past. So they would love to have something that's a Florida-based product, feedstock. Yes, sir.
Why don't they use sugar cane?
Well, you know, I very naively thought that too when we considered building ethanol, our own ethanol plant. I said, well, this is a slam dunk. We'll use sugarcane. We got tons of sugarcane. It turns out there's such an incredible subsidy that they've managed to get for sugar as food that the sugarcane growers are not willing to let it be used for ethanol. And there's a huge monopoly down there, and apparently they've given tons of money to Congress over the years. And so unless that giant subsidy that they receive for making it into sugar goes away, there's no potential for doing that. That's the logical thing to do in this state, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. Yes, Tom.
In the marine world for recreational boaters, I understand there's an issue with ethanol in the fuel.
Yes.
Is non-ethanol fuel available generally?
We have it. Some of our competitors do. There are some actual issues that happen with older boats that don't have the fiberglass tanks that can't withstand the corrosive nature of ethanol. The boat manufacturers contend that newer boats should have no problem, but we know from our experience, because we supply a number of marinas, that boat owners in general do not want to have their fuel can have ethanol in it. If water gets in there, it's soluble in water, and that can cause the problems, and obviously around the water. So we supply several marinas in town with non-ethanol fuel. It's legal under the state's rules to sell that for boats, for old vehicles, and for off-road use. And we have now, I think we have 3 locations in town where there's a dispenser where you can pull up, because not everybody keeps their boat at a marina. A lot of people tow their boat, so we're selling that. And what we are selling is premium gasoline without any ethanol, with an additive in there to make it work for boaters. And we've got pretty good demand for that as well. We'll continue that and expand it where we can. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I know that you have, what, 3 stations that sell E85?
Yes.
Stone Island,
Mhm.
Lily, and,
Over in Orange Park and White Springs.
okay.
Right.
Do you see any, when do you think we may have one in Duval? Because we've had some questions about that. You know, that's
yeah.
going to be E85 stations. in
We're-
Duval. They don't have to travel so far to get their E85.
So we understand. We had wanted to put one at a location we rebuilt right on Bay Meadows at I-95, which would have been perfect, but we didn't have a large enough tank cavity in the spot there that we could fit a tank in. So we're still exploring doing that. We don't have any specific plans right now for doing that, but we understand that we need to have some out here closer into the heart of Jacksonville, because that's where the majority of the demand would be.
Yeah, that's where we've been receiving questions at.
Yeah. We hope to be able to do that. Yes, ma'am.
Isn't there a byproduct from sugarcane that can be made into ethanol, or am I?
No, it's the bagasse.
Yeah, the
Yes,
bagasse,
the
right.
bagasse. It can be. Again, there's an issue of how much does it cost to do that, and how much ethanol do you get out of that. But there are people that are experimenting with that. It apparently a more logical use for that, if you can actually get the sugar cane to become ethanol, is to use the bagasse for fuel for the plant and burn that in some way. I'm sorry?
What Brazil does.
Yeah, exactly. And sugarcane, as many of you may know, has about 3 times the yield that corn does in terms of ethanol. So there's all the reason in the world to have ethanol come from sugarcane if you can.
But it doesn't, the bagasse is a byproduct, right? It's not, it doesn't get into the whole food subsidy, it's a waste.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's what you would ordinarily throw away.
Right.
There are people that are experimenting with using citrus pulp, citrus waste to make ethanol. And again, you can make it, you just can't make it at an economical price right now. There are 2 outfits down in Highland County that are putting together plants to make ethanol out of sweet sorghum. And that has some potential. It grows well in Florida. It looks like you could actually have two crops per year, and it's got a pretty reasonable yield. So a consortium that's, I think it's now owned 100% by BP, has one of those plants, and a group called U.S. EnviroFuels, or maybe the Highlands EnviroFuels is what they call that plant, are trying to get up and running. But it's difficult for someone to raise capital for an enterprise that's not economically proven yet, and that's one of the obstacles. That it's, whether you like it or not, it's probably going to take some of these giant companies like BP and Shell and Exxon that have deep pockets for this to happen. And just as an aside, the major oil companies bitterly resisted ethanol initially. They thought they could defeat ethanol. They don't like it because it's introduced into the product long after the manufacturing stage. They make their gasoline in a refinery, shipped through a pipeline, or shipped to a terminal, and then people buy it. Well, ethanol now is introduced at the terminal, and they've lost control over that. And plus, they're giving up the profit on 10% of their product too, if they're having to buy ethanol or something else. So they fought it for a long time, but they realized 2 or 3 years ago they were going to lose, because at least up until recently, ethanol was one of the few things that both Democrats and Republicans in Congress agreed on. And so over the last 3 years, as some of the people that produced ethanol plants during the boom went under, the major oil companies have been buying up these plants. Valero Oil, who is the largest refinery in the United States, I think has now become the #1 producer of ethanol. BP has ethanol plants, Marathon has ethanol plants, Shell has ethanol plants. I think even Exxon has finally grudgingly started to make some investments in that. So I think that of itself is an indication that ethanol is here to stay for quite a while. It's not the permanent solution to what we're doing, but it certainly does appear to be the best or one of the best transitional fuels until we can find a non-fossil fuel substitute for gasoline. Yes, ma'am.
Forgive me if we already covered this. What are the emissions with the ethanol plant? Is it less than a refinery? Is it less than?
It's less than a refinery. There's some controversy about this of whether producing ethanol actually increases the carbon content of the atmosphere. I'm not an engineer, so I can't tell you specifically. We were pretty confident in the ethanol plant that we were going to build that we were not going to increase the carbon emissions, but it would actually reduce them. But some of the older ethanol plants may not be that case. But I think the current technology is fine for that. There's a lot of issues. Ethanol, the traditional ethanol plant has a tremendous water usage as well too, and so that can cause an issue somewhere. That's again why this proposal, I think, to take natural gas and convert it into methane just makes all the sense in the world to me, because that's something that's being done right now. Petrochemical plants have been doing that for years, so it's a process that's proven. And again, we come up with a liquid fuel. It's still a fossil fuel, but natural gas is the cleanest fossil fuel we have right now. So again, as a transition, we have a huge reserve. We can do this domestically. We don't have to get it from Saudi Arabia or Venezuela. So I hope that has some feet in Congress. Yes, sir.
Do you know what the energy cost is to convert natural gas to methanol is?
No, I don't. But the fact that petrochemical plants have been doing it for years indicates that it must make sense to do so. And remember, the price of natural gas too has been depressed and is going to continue to be depressed for years in the United States, because the supply so much exceeds the demand. Based on the BTU content of natural gas compared to crude oil, natural gas right now should be selling for about $14 per million cubic feet, and it's selling for less than $4.
$3.70 this morning.
Okay. Yeah, and that's not likely to change. You may have read, and there's some controversy associated with this, of course, but a new drilling technology for horizontal drilling in areas of shale it caused a huge surge in our domestic natural gas production, and it's likely to continue for a number of years. So we're probably 4th in the world in natural gas reserves, behind Russia and some of the Middle Eastern countries, and we have a huge amount. One of the problems with natural gas, though, is the distribution system. There's a network of pipelines in the Southwest. There's not a network of pipelines here and some of the other places, so there's some infrastructure requirements to get that working. But if you can convert it to a liquid fuel very easily, then you can just add it right in at the refinery and bring it over using the conventional infrastructure. So, yeah, that's right.
Do you have any opinions you could share on what you think will be the most likely substantive discussions on energy policy in Florida this coming legislative season? Well,
it's not an educated opinion. I'll offer you my educated guess. Remember one, we have a new governor, and we have a state that's struggling to find any money to meet their budget. So I would be pleasantly surprised if there's any ambitious agenda that's put out in the near future in Florida. We have a new commissioner of agriculture. I don't think he disagrees with former Commissioner Bronson's views, but former Commissioner Bronson was very much an advocate of trying to find Florida-based feedstocks to produce fuel. We'll see. I think we'll have a better feel after this session in October if Mr. Putnam and the Governor Scott share that view.
The governor announced some months ago that he was going to be developing a policy proposal to be released, maybe September. We're pretty close to the end of September.
I don't think they're going to make that. And maybe since the time he made that announcement, the Agriculture Department announced the plans to have this energy summit, and he's been invited to speak. So perhaps they're wanting to use that as the forum where the new plan is unveiled. That's one of the things I'm expecting, that we'll get a glimpse of what might be proposed then. Don't expect any miracles though, because even if all of a sudden there's a bunch of grants for people to experiment, everything is still in the experimental stage. There's still no process, non-corn process that I'm aware of, that's very close to be proven economically. And it's good and bad when the price of gasoline goes up and down. When gasoline is approaching $5 a gallon, then all of a sudden a number of alternative fuels begin to look attractive. When you get gasoline down in the area of $3.50, then it's very difficult for some of these other fuels to compete. Any other questions? Thank you very much.